Dennis. I met Dennis 5 years ago, I think, at a conference on just this topic. And the conference was a disappointment, but our collaboration was golden. And ever since, we've been working together. And I think you all know him well, so I don't have to give a lengthy introduction. But I think what I admire and value in Dennis so much is just how much he is, you might say, part of the economic establishment. And at the same time, is really embraced and added to the multi-level, the new paradigm, you might say. So, when I hear these ideas elaborated and coming from Dennis, I think it adds so much more to my own outsider perspective. So I've had great collaborations in my life, and this is one of them. So Dennis, please take it from here.
Well, thank you very much. This has been a life-transforming collaboration for me, and I will always be deeply indebted to you, David, for it. But instead of spending the full hour on praising our collaboration, let me share my screen. 1 second, here we are. And David asked me to introduce the Global Solutions Initiative. And just 1 second, let me share. This is the best I can do. Oh, there. Is this better?
Yes.
Yes.
Good,
Yeah.
excellent. And the Global Solutions Initiative comes at the problem of multi-level selection, in my mind, from the opposite end of the tunnel, from which David and I approached it when we've been working on our new paradigm for economics built on multi-level selection. And I'd like to just run through the few slides I have really quickly in order to have a conversation with you about the challenges that this poses, which is bringing multi-level selection into the domain of global problem solving, particularly with regard to the G20 and the G7, which are the primary fora that the Global Solutions Initiative advises. We've been fortunate right at the beginning to have the Chancellor of Germany with us and numerous Nobel laureates and Bill Gates and other people. And basically what the initiative does, it started in 2017 under Germany's G20 presidency, when Angela Merkel asked me to lead the Think 20 process. Those are think tanks of the G20. And we got in touch with about 400 to 500 research organizations across the G20 and beyond, and came up with a one-word summary of what we were doing, which at that time I didn't know, David, but it was sort of a premonition of multi-level selection. The one-word summary of what we were doing was recoupling, which is that economic prosperity can become decoupled from social and environmental prosperity. And when that happens, it's the G20's job to focus on recoupling economic prosperity with social and environmental prosperity, with people and planet, not the other way around, which ran completely against the grain of what the G20 was doing at the time. It was focused entirely on economic and financial issues, and a few others heavily related to that. But shortly before the German G20 summit, that looked like the occasion when multilateralism ultimately collapses. Trump said he would leave the Paris Climate Accord. Protectionism was rising everywhere. The German government took up this phrase, recoupling, And it could turn to the protectionists who said we're the only ones who represent the disadvantaged in the world. And they say, oh, no, you're not. In fact, we are focused on the human needs, starting with the needs of the neediest. And we wish to recouple economic prosperity with social and environmental. And they came up, they had a whole list of recommendations that we had prepared that were far more effective than protectionism. And that changed the nature of the negotiations. And so I was privileged early on to see that these ideas can have effect. And under the same rubric, the German government decided to take up one of the ideas that I was pushing, which at the time received no attention and lots of raised eyebrows. It was called pandemic preparedness, and the German government put together an international network to deal with this, and 3 years later that proved to be quite useful. So the Global Solutions Initiative sort of gained certain standing, and we've been able to advise the G20 presidencies from year to year since then. And more recently, when Germany got the G7 presidencies, we were asked to do the same. So we bring together research institutions, and we've got a Council for Global Problem Solving that contains very influential research organizations from the G20 and beyond. We are interested in implementation of solution proposals through roundtables, like we've got a business policymaker roundtable. We've got young global changers, people under the age of 35 who are doing things from this recoupling perspective. And we provide organizational continuity, a G20 Insights platform that provide summaries of the main ideas that have come out of the task forces and policy briefs. And the major global problems are well known, but I've just listed some of the really serious ones here because they help confront us with the size of the challenge. I think at the level of global problem solving, the challenge of multi-level selection could not be greater, because you need global collaboration for global problems like climate change, biodiversity loss, global problems. So no country can do that on its own. But different countries have different cultures, different polities, different societies. So there'll be diverse pathways to what one hopes are common goals. And each of these problems can only be addressed through a proper integration of the top-down macro decision-making and the bottom-up micro initiatives. And that holds for a large list of problems. And you can see just by looking at this list that they're interconnected with one another. So climate change, energy insecurity, food insecurity, and biodiversity loss, very closely related to one another. Insofar as developing countries come into play with food and energy security, sovereign debt problems become important. Seeing this through the lens of multi-level selection gives this sort of a whole new meaning, which I will come to right away. But I think at the moment, the important thing to understand is each of these global problems is systemic. So you cannot divorce this problem from other problems or bring it down to a regional or a local level. They are orphan problems in the sense that no country is either willing or able to deal with them on its own. They are wicked problems, complex, and the solutions and the problems themselves are often not completely specified, and many of them involve urgent threats to humanity. They can't be solved exclusively by top-down policy making. They require stakeholder collaboration, by which I mean collaboration of business, research, policymaking, civil society. And the G20 potentially can do that because it has a flexible geometry. It has working groups, a Sherpa track, a finance track, engagement groups, and they can be put together in innovative ways, but that potential is not being exploited, and multi-level selection could provide an intellectual framework for doing that, but it's never been done. They are shared problems, not common ones. So common problems are things like caring for people in their old age, which is usually considered a national problem, except in the poorest countries. Shared problems are problems that countries have to address together. So we deal with the shared problems. There's no one size fits all. As I mentioned, you need diverse pathways to common goals, and recoupling, about which I'll say a little more. And then David and I have been working on this new paradigm for economics, the multi-level paradigm. I'll run through it just very briefly. You're all tuned in to all of this. The first and most important idea is flexible multiple levels of functional organization. So humans function not only at the level of the individual, but also at the level of social and political groups and economic groups, and they come in various sizes. And people's allegiance to these groups is flexible, and they can belong to multiple groups at the same time. And the evolutionary purpose of all of this is that as the collective challenges that people faced changed through time, people could change their degree, their level of functional organization accordingly in order to address these collective challenges if things went well. Then there's the issue of agency, that agency is distributed and evolving, which means that it's distributed across levels. Agency doesn't only reside in an individual, it can reside in a group or in a group of groups. And then there's domain interconnectedness. This is really important, that it's impossible to understand the economy unless you understand the polity and the society and the environment in which each economy is embedded. And these domains will vary from region to region, civilization to civilization, country to country. And so this concept of the embedded economy is absolutely critical and puzzling for mainstream economists who usually see economics as completely divorced from the other social and natural sciences. And we say you can't understand the first thing about economics until you have understood the embedded economy. And then there is uncertainty as distinguished from risk. There are many unknown unknowns. There are ways that people have evolved to deal with uncertainty. And with regards to economic theory, it is theory pluralism that is called for. You need what we call cognitidiversity, which means a diversity of different perspectives, different ways of understanding the world that are all consonant with the empirical evidence that we have, so that the next time something surprising happens in this unknowable world, we will be able to switch mental models in order to deal with this surprising thing, which is something that economic theory has not been very good at doing. And then decision-making is context-dependent, so your economic, political, social, environmental context is absolutely critical to the multi-level decision-making. And in economics, decision makers are households, firms, governments, banks, and that is an ossified structure. You've got the same agent sort of straight through time. And here, much of the work that's going on is the evolution of levels in multi-level decision making. And so when you try to evaluate people's welfare, their well-being or human flourishing, you have multi-level drivers of flourishing, about which I will say a little more in a moment from now. But it means that you need a whole new understanding of the purpose of economics, which is not a study of the relationships between means and ends, but rather how you can mobilize economic means in the embedded economy to promote human flourishing from a multi-level perspective. So now I come to share my frustrations with you. Because when we are advising G20 policymakers or business leaders or civil society representatives, they all ask one question. Okay, forget all the theoretical talk and the worldviews and so on. Just tell me what to do. Should interest rates go up or down? Should we invest in this infrastructure project or that? Should we have more devolution or less? Tell me what to do. And that means identifying actors. Is it business? Is it policymakers? Is it civil society actors? Keeping in mind that none of these actors can solve these problems all by themselves. So it is usually a constellation of actors that needs to be identified, together with a constellation of actions that they need to perform. And now the next issue is, once they perform the action, we need to measure the effectiveness of that action relative to performance with regards to human flourishing. And I have more to say about that in a moment. And once you've measured it, then you've got a basis for reporting and accounting. And then you need a governance system in place in order to act on the reporting. But before any of that can get started from a research perspective, that's the right-hand arrow going from down up, you need to measure performance. And with regard to those measures of performance, you can then measure action effectiveness, and from that, reporting and governance comes into play. So the stakeholders, they are the top-down arrow asking, what should I do? And then the researchers, they measure performance and report on it and suggest governance systems. So this what should I do question is something that we need, is in the forefront of our minds. And if multi-level selection cannot be mobilized to answer that question, then it will not be relevant in this body. And I'm convinced that we must bring it to bear. It has already had an effect, as I said, in various respects in a roundabout way, but not rigorously. So on the right-hand side here, I've got Ostrom's core design principles. And on the left-hand side, I've got the what should I do implications: performance measurement, reporting, accounting, incentives, governance, and action effectiveness, and right down through incentives and governance of actions, and then the systemic influence of how this interacts. And you can, for the G20, it's interesting, primarily by countries, but also by sectors, regions, cities, businesses, international organizations, civic organizations. Each of these, the effectiveness of their actions can be measured. And these different aspects of measuring, you can see the colors match up. The actors, the shared identity and purpose, that's one color. The action, the effectiveness, that comes is the same color as the core design principles 2 and 3. Monitoring, there you need the measurement and reporting, etc., and so on. So it's a complex problem trying to marry our understanding of the multi-level selection with our understanding of what governments need in the G20 process. And the G20, I think, is sort of the primary actor that has largely moral suasion on countries to to do things. Global Solutions Initiative focuses on 6 broad areas. One is human flourishing, which is basically human flourishing from a multi-level perspective. That provides sort of a framework for understanding what countries should do. And that needs to be connected with climate action and sustainability, digital governance and AI, trade and geoeconomics, global finance, global governance, and multilateralism. Now, there are obviously more problems. I've listed them before, but those are the ones that we focus on particularly and have groups of experts working on. The embedded economy is something that you must keep in mind in this entire process, that the economy is embedded within a polity, which is embedded within a society, which are basically ongoing, persistent social relations among people within a particular class, and that's embedded within an environment. And there are obviously linkages across these domains. And so in order to get our heads around measurement, I assembled a team that put together the SAGE dashboard, where SAGE stands for Solidarity, Agency, Material Gain, and Environmental Stewardship. And the basic idea there was that a country that is socially cohesive, people are pulling in the same direction, they have agency, so people feel empowered to affect their lives in significant ways through their own actions, in ways that they find meaningful. Material gain, which is that their basic material needs are covered. And environmental stewardship, which means that they're doing what is necessary to live in a sustainable world, not to kill nature. Countries that do all of that, they can't be doing so bad. Thinking more about this, and it's possible to measure these things. Say, the Gallup World Poll has measures, asks questions that can be put into these categories. Then thinking more about this, each element of SAGE corresponds to a human need, like solidarity is the need for belonging, but it also corresponds to an ability which can meet that need. The ability is prosociality. And it corresponds to a value, care or love or what have you, which is a moral principle that is meant to engage you to use your abilities to satisfy that need. And similarly with agency, where the need is the need for empowerment, and the ability is niche construction, the value is liberty. And gain, it's basically in economics, the object is consumption. Oops, I'm sorry, I've got a problem with my computer. The ability is sustenance of yourself, your family, and wider community. The value is utility, and environmental stewardship, the needs, abilities, and values is sustainability, regeneration, values of deep ecology, and other things of that sort. And there are philosophies that accompany this. And I think a case can be made that an important reason why Homo sapiens have been so successful in the evolutionary process is that they're able to mobilize their solidarity at levels that correspond to the collective challenges that they face. And their agency is not only individual agency, but it is also their contributions to collective agency and so forth. So I think you can see what I'm getting at. And these 4 elements of the SAGE dashboard correspond to different core design principles, reasonably straightforwardly. And I think 2 things need to be kept in mind. One is the scale of the challenges. So at the G20 level, you can formulate climate goals for the whole world. So the Paris Climate Accord did that. And then that can be broken down to the country level. So those are these national voluntary contributions. That needs to be broken down to the regional level, and that needs to be broken down to the local level. So you've got scales that need to be brought into consonance with one another. And the scale of our capacities to deal with this problem, this consonance needs to match up with the scale of the challenges that we face. And that is a scale. And then there's a matter of scope. The challenges also vary in scope. So there is, and the scope is most easily understandable, I think, in SAGE terms through alienation, which is sort of the opposite of pro-sociality, is one of the challenges. Disempowerment, that's can be dealt with through niche construction in terms of our capacities. Poverty, it can be dealt with the capacity for sustenance, and environmental degradation be dealt with through our capacity for regeneration. So you need to recouple both in scale and in scope. And that needs to be done from the macro to the micro levels. And the multi-level selection, the multi-level paradigm is meant to provide a rigorous understanding of how this is done. And in order to, this is my last slide, to put all of this into perspective, have a look at this slide where on the top you've got collective challenges, at the bottom you've got collective capacities that I've talked about. And some of them are internal, psychological motives, moral values, the narratives we tell, identities that we have. Those are all things that go on, inside our heads. The inside and outside should be reversed in this slide. And you've got internal solidarity and internal agency that deal with these internal mechanisms. But at the same time, you've got external mechanisms, shared purpose, agentic governance, the redirection of gains so that economies can serve people and planet, and environmental relatedness. And the core design principles obviously fall largely under the external mechanisms, with the exception of the first, which is an internal mechanism. That is the nature of the challenge. So I've kept this as brief as I can, and I will stop sharing my screen because I would like to discuss with you how we can pull all of this together. Because what I would like to do is to make multi-level selection the paradigm, the basis on which we advise the G20 and the G7 with regard to global problems. And as I say, these are particularly large-scale and wicked problems. And one thing that David keeps repeating, which always continually comes to mind when I'm advising these governments, is that CAS 2 systems do not self-organize into CAS 1 systems. So systems that are adaptive on a systemic level, that's CAS 1, and CAS 2 are subsystems that are adapting for their own purposes. The subsystems adapting to their own purposes never yields a systemic solution to a global problem. So therefore, we need to manage the evolution of our economies, polities, societies, so as to address the challenges that we face. And currently, the way we are set up in terms of nation states that control most of the levers of economic power, international organizations that basically are further playgrounds in which nation states conduct their conflicts often, that is ill-suited to the problems that we face. And so this is a wonderful group, very diverse. And what I'd love to do is simply mobilize your initiatives, your ideas, and so on, to pull all of this together in the service of global problem solving. Okay, enough said, and now is my learning of it.
Wow, I'm sure there's going to be so many people. There's Michael right up to the block. Michael, let me just wedge in a thought. I'm so glad, Dennis, that you emphasized inner and outer towards the end of your talk. And I think it reminds me that when I talk about generalized Darwinism, it's multi-level selection plus more. And that more is dual inheritance theory, which focuses on that inner and outer. So I'm really happy that you also emphasized the inner and outer dimensions in addition to multi-level selection. So I'm so happy to have heard this talk and to have it recorded. And so, Michael, let's proceed directly to you. Please raise your virtual hands to form a queue.
Yeah, well, thank you, Dennis, for that insight. And my question is very simple in terms of how MLS can support the G20. And I believe your question, the main question is, what should I do? Like decision makers sitting there and saying, okay, I want here the to-do list. And you mentioned that the system needs to match the challenge, right? And the question obviously is, can a G system, just governments, representatives of governments, solve those issues? Obviously, answer is no, but are there formats within the G20 in which there are multi-level representations, or let's say even just multi-stakeholder groups around issues present? And I know that there's sort of the siphoning off, there's the, what is it, the E20, the nonprofit 20, and whatever, all of those corresponding elements, but they're very old sector style thinking, not really problem oriented key stakeholders that are present in the conversation. So I find it, in some way, it's not going to match the challenge if the question is, what should I do, and those people aren't in the space of co-creating the solution, because I don't think there's any one group that will have the answer. It needs to be a co-creation. And so the question simply is that process, is the G20 or whatever the process is flexible enough to include that as a general approach?
I've raised this repeatedly with policymakers in G20 countries, G20 Sherpas, and so on. And those who have the patience to listen to the question and understand it, they reply the same way as all other policymakers do. Okay, fine, you want more flexibility? Go ahead. What should we do? How do you want to put this together? So the G20 is quite a flexible place. It's not, like the UN or other international organizations. Things can be put together flexibly, but leave it to people's own initiatives. They'll crawl back into their old silos, and you won't get very far. So the question is, okay, now how do you want to do this? And I can give you, examples of how this could be used. Let's say we have we've put together roundtables of senior business leaders and senior policymakers in order to address the question, what do you need to do to the regulatory incentive structural environment of firms so that businesses can compete for profit while regenerating the environment and sustaining societies automatically? So how do you change the system so that it is impossible to earn profit by destroying the environment or subverting society? And that is not a question that either businesses by themselves can answer or policymakers by themselves, or certainly civil society by itself. And together the question makes sense, but now the question is, okay, now what is the constellation of actors you need in order to answer this question effectively? across which areas. And I think this is where the rubber hits the road in this one particular domain. Now, therefore, I'd be really interested in your ideas on answering the what shall we do question, even here too, in terms of flexibility. Because what they are sick of hearing is, oh, you're thinking about it wrong, and you should read a few more fundamental papers on theory and philosophy and so on, and then figure out for yourself what to do. That does not lead anywhere, except it closes a lot of doors. So I think it's our job to come up with ideas to answer the what shall we do question. And keep in mind, other movements have been successful insofar as they could answer that. So neoliberals, most people don't understand neoliberal theory, but they do understand that this stands for deregulation and all sorts of stuff like that. They understand that Keynesianism, they don't understand the principle of effective demand and the possibility of quantity rationing and all the stuff that underlies it. But they do understand that it means spending more in a recession. And that's the sort of thing that we need to come up with for multi-level selection in response to global problems.
Laura.
Sorry, I'm going to constrain myself. I'm talking too much.
So let's be brisk
great.
because we have 5 people in the queue. This is all great, and so and we do need to honor our time. So Lauren, straight to you.
Yeah, my turn. So okay, thank you very much, and thank you very much, Dennis, for leading this conversation. So I take a point of view which is, you know, I talked about agile and iterative work and how it works in industry and in companies, and how we have the ability to create feedback loops very fast with data. And one of the key, and not talking about the organization and the decisions they are taking, but talking about how they are organized, they all have an IT department. Something like, we have all the data, we are able to measure everything that the company is doing internally. They don't do it externally usually. Now they will have to for scope 2 and scope 3 reasons. But could there be a place for people like us to monitor and to reflect any decision, and to say, if you do this, we can estimate this is the potential outcome, and we're going to measure it and to show you the effect of what, to create the feedback loop globally to all the people, not necessarily being embedded in a decision team, but rather as a counter, a quality insurance of the decisions. This is how what happens in agile companies. So, and they also tend to, back to what I was saying about virtual twins, they also tend to make simulation tools in order to prototype what the decision could have as an outcome. And I recently saw an interview on a US channel of Christine Lagarde, who is the head of the European Bank, and she was saying they have that kind of thing. They are able to simulate the decision when they raise an interest rate. They have means to simulate the outcome, so they probably have pieces of that. What's your point of view on this?
Okay, I know the models of the ECB, but I think quality control is useful once you've understood what quality means. And a lot of work goes into that because, say, businesses, quality may mean profit plus anything that'll keep us out of trouble with the regulators and not give us a bad name among the consumers. But that's not the same thing as human flourishing. So measuring that consistently across countries, businesses, other organizations, made lots of progress in that regard. And then monitoring. Now, monitoring is a huge job in the business field. You need to monitor global value chains rather than individual businesses, because otherwise you've got leakage, like carbon leakage and so all over the place. And that is multi-country, multi-organization. So it's a big job. And if we could provide foundation for organizing it or how to think about it or so on, that would be greatly appreciated within various G20 institutions. So I think the doors are wide open, but we just have to put something interesting into them.
All right.
I'm interested in working on this.
Yes,
Not taking
please.
much, but
Yeah, yes.
So
including
I'd like-
well-being metrics, for example, KPIs for psychological flexibility and things like that.
Mauricio, so let's take note of that, Juliet, that this is an interest group that we could form maybe. I think Mauricio, you're
I'm trying to raise my hand. For some reason, I don't see it. It's really strange. But anyway, when you think is the right time, consider
Okay.
my hand up.
okay. Let's proceed to Heinrich from South Africa.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, David. Hello, colleagues. And Dennis, thanks for a fascinating and sobering presentation about the challenges we face. Of course, we've had discussions about this, but maybe just to raise it at this point, and that is the fortuitous sort of location of the G20 in South Africa, kind of allows for the concept of Ubuntu perhaps to be explored. And of course, Ubuntu has a natural relationship with MLS and pro-sociality broadly. I've worked on developing a framework with others and looking at how this could actually be sort of implemented in a way that's workable. So Ubuntu has shown utility in that it is able to be expressed in formal mechanisms of governance and reconciliation. We saw that in South Africa with the Ubuntu informing the Bato Pele principles, which informed the initial public service delivery thrust in the early democratic dispensation, and of course in the Archbishop Tutu's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was squarely founded on the principles of Ubuntu. These are actual mechanisms solving real-world problems based on this philosophy. And so I wonder if you can comment on the potential value of linking Ubuntu to MLS and finding a way of generating practical solutions that may be of interest in the G20 context.
So once again, I'd say, yes, Ubuntu is definitely consonant with multi-level selection. And yes, it has the potential, but unless that potential is fulfilled, we are nowhere. And so South Africa's presidency could make a big splash by finding concrete policies based on Ubuntu that bring global problem solving onto a different level. But these things need to be derived concretely. Otherwise, it's just a concept.
Mitch, I think did you still want to speak?
Yeah, I did, but I'd prefer to hear everybody else if that's possible.
Okay, Ted?
Thanks very much. So apologies for not being a more regular member of this community, because this was a really terrific talk, Dennis, and I found it very stimulating. I snipped a bunch of your slides for my private use, confidential use, including the one where you have the table on the multi-level paradigm. And my question is very simple. The 21st century, the dominant emotion is going to be fear. And I think we're seeing a world that's awash in fear, and that various opportunistic political actors are leveraging fear to build their political power. We know exactly who they are. When I look at your table of what the multi-level paradigm requires, all of which I happen to agree with, and I think is necessary, flexible multiple levels of functional organization, distributed evolving agency, capacity to deal with uncertainty, theory pluralism, context-dependent multi-level decision-making, etc. Fear is antithetical to that kind of subtle, deliberate, collaborative approach to problem solving. Fear engenders tribalism. It deepens boundaries between groups. It produces a rigidity, intellectual rigidity. and a desire to reach decisions quickly, and probably a propensity towards use of force and power in response to challenges. So I see a fundamental contradiction between, in a sense, the emotional trajectory of humankind and what we need to do in terms of our problem-solving paradigm. I'm just wondering how you address that.
I want to chip in after Dennis, so very briefly. I'll keep it 2 seconds.
Okay, my less than a minute worth is that this is a really important issue that you've just addressed, and emotions are context dependent. And one of the most important things that policymakers can do is create contexts that will help promote collaborative thinking. And that drives you in different directions in terms of education policy, health policy, welfare policy. And it would be useful to, and I think by measuring things beyond GDP, like SAGE, you can connect with a lot of this. Say, before Trump became president the last time, 2 years before, solidarity and agency in the United States fell. Even though GDP was rising nicely. So it uncovers things. And this has huge policy implications, but our job is to derive what they are. Sorry, David.
Again and again, people who kind of enter the multi-level selection word describe it as hopeful. And I think that emotional valence, I think, is something that you, Ted, you described the prevailing environment of fear, but that can be changed, and it can be changed within our internal conversations. And I'm impressed again and again and again of our people who come into this pro-socially oriented world. They say, first and foremost, oh my God, this is so hopeful. And it's just like someone dying of thirst, just finding water. So I think that that's something that we could be doing. But thanks for raising the emotional valence. I think is really important. I think Mauricio, you're next, and then Tunisia.
Okay. Thanks also on my part. This is a fantastic meeting of minds and of ideas. So I wanted to offer our experience at Imperial College. We've been working on these type of problems for a while. The way we see it is basically the missing link between, essentially public policies and private sectors integration and transformational change, which is pretty obvious, is a problem. The way in which we are working on the problem, we have developed at least a solution that we are testing in collaboration with the World Bank. It has to do essentially with a program with, well, in this case, with the World Bank funding the government of Uzbekistan, where we're selecting two sectors, and we are involving a large number of companies for these two sectors, like 500 companies, through a process that has to start with capacity building, right, which includes the individual mindset development that David, you were just talking about. But it also includes organizational development and strategy development. These are all, it's a level of analysis that I've seen very little of, and unfortunately the G7, G20, like all, EMF, IMF, the problem there is not that it's just it's not only that there is a neoclassic paradigm that dominates. The problem is that actually there is no capacity of understanding the micro foundations of their models, of their mindsets, of the way they're thinking about their role, let alone designing their interventions so that actually the private sector can thrive, can engage, can actually do the transformational change is required. So it's policies, is funding maybe policies at the government level that actually, unfortunately, we know are not effective. So the capacity building is step one. Then there is a process of funding, right? These new transformational strategies that are developed by companies. And that again, in theory, is, the availability is there. There are, trillions that are available to support this. Unfortunately, the reality is that it doesn't get not nearly as much as necessary to the company level, the private sector, especially in SMEs, right? We know this. And then the step three is the implementation, the support to companies to actually implement the strategic, sustainable strategies, regenerative strategy plans, funded. Then the question is how to implement. It's not obvious. So it's all those three stages that need to be brought into the picture. Let's see what happens in Uzbekistan. That's a pilot. The World Bank is already talking about a number of other countries where they are funding the governments and they're finding the same problems of implementing sustainable development policies. They're providing.
Mauricio, please, we have other people.
So the
please
point.
just.
Yep, that's it. I wanted to kind of share this and maybe listen, hear what Dennis has to say about it.
Well, basically, we need insights into what the G20 needs to do, and we'll await with interest what Uzbekistan does, but that's still quite far removed from global problem solving at the G20 level.
Yeah, it's a model that we're testing there, but in any case, maybe we can take it on a.
Yeah, all of these should be continued. Tanuja.
Yep. Thank you, Dennis, for a very clear presentation. I'm going to focus on a very narrow piece. You said that individual actors acting in a certain way doesn't necessarily lead to a desired result. And so that is the definition of the emergent effects in a complex systems. So I'd like to put forward, and this is also the work that I'm doing in my work, is that the connection between the actors acting and the emergent effect is a non-linear, disjointed connection. And so this can only be managed through an equivalently so-called disjointed system of governance, where the top-down and bottom-up are two different measurement parameters, two different measurement techniques. Applied.
I'd love to hear more about this because I don't know enough about it. Perhaps David will give you my email. I'd love to read.
We're working with Tanuja we're working closely with Tanuja, so we'll have ample opportunities to do that.
Okay, very quickly, where I am getting my ideas from is from Eastern holistic medical systems, because they have been using this method for 5,000 years. Thank you.
Okay, great. Allison, you had your hand raised at one point. Do you still want to say something? Or maybe you had to leave. Allison, there you are.
Oh, hi. Thank you. To get down just, but it would be so lovely to focus in at some point, taking what we know about neoliberalism and talking about, I think I'm hearing a lot of why it's not working from the failure of human greed perspective, as if, that's just what it was reflecting. But when it comes to the multi-level selection, what are the economic strategies that reflect living systems? For instance, with Ubuntu being that I am because we are, when it comes to neoliberalism and why that popularity is there, because we have this focus on singular ownership, right? How does private property in both of equity and of money and the way it's issued and of property reflect a contradiction to Ubuntu? So how can we see each of these concepts very specifically in economic paradigms that work within a system that are actionable now. In fact, so for instance, a land trust opportunity to have shared equity and distributed equity would be more of an Ubuntu style. And I think that those are some of the strategies that are very actionable and practical that we can talk about reflecting on multi-levels. I'd look forward to talking about that from assets and monetary system and the ingenuity, which I think, yeah, reflect our.
Well, yeah, that's a great comment to end with our hour with. This is so great. I'm so happy that Dennis, that you gave this, that it's been recorded, that we had a taste of it, and that we could then proceed on this basis. I found this to be just like a superb brief for support for this kind of thing, and I think that it really demonstrates, I think, for all of its unfinished nature, and so much remains to be done. I think that this is the path for polycentric governance, basically, all the way from the smallest of groups, from the individual in the smallest of groups, all the way up to the planet. And so I can't help but think that somebody who views this and absorbs what it means would be just enthusiastic about promoting it. So great, and we'll honor our time. And so thank you, everybody. And the whole point of this coalition is that it doesn't end; it just continues. We've created a framework for continuous interactions and the development of multiple projects and so on. And we're only at the beginning of that. So very pleased with this talk. Thank you so much, Dennis.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very good. All the best.
All the best. Heinrich, I think we're keeping on.